You might think you know the story of Thumbelina, the little girl who was born from a flower and spent her days outsmarting would-be suitors. But what if I told you that tale was wrong? What if Hans Christian Andersen's most famous fairy tale was actually a horror story? Let me explain. When we first meet Thumbelina, she's a tiny person living in a miniature world made of flowers and grass blades. Initially, everything is blissful. She's free to explore, loved by her mother, and generally safe from harm. But as time passes, a crushing reality sets in. No matter how far she roams, she can't escape her size. And as she reaches the apparent boundaries of her world, she meets other tiny people, each more peculiar than the last. At first, these encounters seem like opportunities for growth and discovery. For example, her friendship with the field mouse expands her world beyond the garden. But are these moments of expansion real or imagined? Because once you think about it, the world could be getting smaller, not bigger. That would explain why her encounters become more frequent and intense as she journeys further away from home. Also, when she's faced with danger, like when the toad tries to marry her, she's saved by a higher power, specifically a human girl who finds her in the forest. But if the world is actually shrinking, then every rescue is really Thumbelina hitting a wall, and the humans are only there because she's unknowingly wandering back into town. The thing is, she doesn't realize this until it's too late, because in the meantime, she settles into her new life. She becomes engaged to the frog who lives in the pond and allows him to carry her off to his home, which looks suspiciously like a prison cell. When she discovers she's trapped, she runs away again, this time to the beetle who takes her in, but only so he can make a pair of shoes out of her wings. Luckily, she escapes once more, but this time she is forced to spend the winter hibernating in a tree, while snow buries her world and cuts her off from any hope of rescue. Here, the story takes a dark turn, because it's no longer just about Thumbelina's size or her determination to find a new home. It becomes clear that she's trapped in a cycle of abuse, one that she can't break free from no matter how hard she tries. When she finally emerges from her winter slumber, she meets the mole who promises her security in exchange for her ring, which symbolizes her freedom. And although she hesitates, she agrees to the exchange. Now, on the surface, this seems like a terrible mistake. But what if it's the only rational decision she's made throughout the entire story? After all, up until this point, every time she's been saved, it's by a higher power. And every time she's approached a potential new home, it's been destroyed by the forces of nature or the whims of some unseen entity. So maybe the mole was right. Maybe she is better off surrendering to the darkness. But then she meets the swallow, who offers to take her to a faraway land where tiny people live in peace. Finally, it seems as though Thumbelina has a chance at happiness, or at least a chance to define happiness on her own terms. But even this encounter has a sinister undertone. The swallow makes Thumbelina promise to return in the spring so they can fly south together, which means even her idea of freedom is limited by invisible strings attached to her by invisible puppet masters. In the end, Thumbelina arrives at the Flower Kingdom, and everything seems perfect until she meets the king and queen. They invite her to become their daughter and asks her to pick out whatever jewels she wants from their collection. Now, at this point, anyone who's been paying attention will realize that the Flower Kingdom is just another elaborate cage, and Thumbelina is still no closer to true freedom, because the only thing keeping her from being trapped, again, is her willingness to pick up and move on whenever she wants. And let's be honest, she's shown no signs of wanting to do that. In fact, she's shown the exact opposite. Throughout the story, she becomes increasingly attached to her environment. At first, it's the garden. Then it's the pond, the tree, and finally the Flower Kingdom. So the question is, how did she go from wanting to explore to wanting to stay put? And the answer lies in her connection with the prince. He's everything Thumbelina's not. Powerful, confident, and part of a traditional family structure. He represents everything she's been missing her whole life, or at least everything she thinks she's been missing. But here's the catch, he's just as imaginary as the rest of her world. And although their romance seems genuine, it's really just another sign that Thumbelina is losing her grip on reality. Ultimately, she chooses to stay in the Flower Kingdom with the prince, and their union is celebrated with a feast, where all of the food is made of flowers. And that's when we realize the story has come full circle, because the world may be shrinking, but Thumbelina's mind is imploding, She's gone from curious explorer to delusional princess, and all we can do is watch in horror as she willingly surrenders to her fate. So let me ask you, what was Thumbelina really escaping from? Her world or herself? Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.